On February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States launched coordinated military strikes against targets inside Iran. Explosions were reported in Tehran and other locations tied to Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure. Israeli officials described the operation as preemptive. Washington confirmed its involvement and framed the strikes as necessary to neutralize imminent threats. That is not just another Middle East flare-up. It is the most direct and open confrontation yet between Iran on one side and Israel and the United States on the other. And the consequences stretch far beyond the region. From oil markets to China's strategy, from U.S. force posture to the Taiwan Strait, this conflict has global implications. Let's break down how we got here, why diplomacy failed again, and what the future might look like. At the heart of this confrontation lies Iran's nuclear program. In 2015, Iran and 6 world powers signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the JCPOA. The deal limited Iran's uranium enrichment levels and stockpiles in exchange for sanctions relief. For a few years, tensions cooled. International inspectors were inside Iranian facilities and enrichment was capped. But in 2018, the United States withdrew from the deal and reimposed sweeping sanctions. Iran gradually stepped away from its commitments. Enrichment levels increased. Advanced centrifuges were installed. Stockpiles grew. Israel has consistently argued that Iran's nuclear program is not just about energy, and its leaders have long viewed even the capability to assemble a nuclear weapon as an existential threat. For them, it's not just about whether Iran builds a bomb, it's about how close Iran is to being able to build one quickly. By 2024 and 2025, international monitors reported that Iran's enrichment levels were approaching thresholds that dramatically shortened the breakout time required to produce weapons-grade material. Diplomacy restarted in 2025. Talks were held through intermediaries, including Oman and European states. But major sticking points remained. Iran wanted sanctions relief before rolling back enrichment. The U.S. wanted tighter inspections and broader limits. Israel wanted deeper restrictions that included ballistic missiles. No one was satisfied. For years, Iran and Israel fought a shadow war. Israeli strikes targeted Iranian-linked facilities in Syria. Iran-backed groups launched rockets at Israeli territory. Cyber operations occurred on both sides. But it was mostly indirect. In mid-2025, that changed. Israel conducted large-scale strikes against Iranian nuclear and military sites. Iran responded directly with missiles and drones targeting Israeli territory. For about 2 weeks, the region teetered on the edge of a full-scale war. A ceasefire followed. But it was more of a pause than a resolution. Neither side trusted the other. Iran accelerated certain aspects of its program. Israel reinforced its readiness for another round. The United States increased regional deployments. By early 2026, negotiations were still stalled. Intelligence assessments reportedly suggested that Iran's nuclear capability was reaching a critical threshold. Israel concluded that waiting carried greater risks than acting. That calculation led to the February 28 strikes. Many observers ask the same question: why does diplomacy keep failing? There are several structural reasons. The first is deep strategic distrust. The US, Israel, and Iran fundamentally distrust one another's intentions. Even when technical compromises are found, political trust is absent. Iran believes Washington ultimately seeks regime change. Israel believes Iran ultimately seeks its destruction. The US believes Iran seeks regional hegemony. That makes even small technical disputes politically explosive. Second is the domestic politics on all sides. In Tehran, hardliners argue that concessions only invite more pressure. In Israel, leaders face intense public scrutiny over security threats. In Washington, Iran policy remains politically divisive. Any compromise risks being framed as weakness. Third is missile and regional issues. The nuclear program is only part of the problem. Iran's ballistic missile program has expanded significantly. These missiles are central to its deterrence strategy. But Israel and the US see them as inseparable from nuclear concerns. On top of that, Iran supports regional non-state actors across Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Israel views these networks as part of an integrated threat structure. Even if enrichment were capped, the broader strategic rivalry would remain. The most immediate risk is escalation. Iran has already signaled it will respond, vowing to deal a fatal blow to Israel and US bases in the region. It has multiple tools. Missile strikes against Israel. Attacks on US bases in the Gulf. Maritime disruption in the Strait of Hormuz. Cyber operations. Activation of regional allies. If Iran chooses asymmetric retaliation, the conflict could stretch geographically without becoming a conventional full-scale war. But if miscalculation occurs, for example, if a strike causes high casualties, escalation could spiral quickly. The conflict will trigger an oil and energy shock. Iran sits along one of the world's most critical energy corridors. Any threat to the Strait of Hormuz could spike oil prices dramatically. Higher energy prices would increase global inflation, complicate monetary policy, strain developing economies, and hit Asia particularly hard, given its high energy import share. China, Japan, South Korea, and India all rely heavily on Middle Eastern energy flows. In particular, the crisis becomes strategically interesting for Beijing, which has several overlapping interests. China is one of the largest importers of Middle Eastern oil. Stability in the Gulf directly affects its economy. A prolonged conflict would complicate supply chains and raise costs. Beijing will likely push publicly for de-escalation. China has positioned itself in recent years as a mediator in the Middle East. It brokered a high-profile normalization agreement between regional rivals in the past. A new war challenges that narrative. Beijing may step forward diplomatically, not necessarily to solve the crisis, but to reinforce its image as a stabilizing force. There is also a harder geopolitical angle. If the United States becomes deeply entangled in Middle Eastern combat operations, its military focus and political bandwidth are divided. China watches this closely. For years, the U.S. defense strategy has emphasized shifting focus to the so-called Indo-Pacific. A prolonged Middle East war pulls resources back to the West. Even if the U.S. insists it can handle two theaters, perception matters. The Taiwan Strait factor will become more sensitive than ever in the U.S.-China relations. As one of the most sensitive flashpoints globally, Taiwan has long been regarded by Beijing as a core national interest. Washington supports Taiwan's self-defense capabilities. Military activity around the island has steadily increased in recent years. Now imagine this scenario: intrusions and larger naval drills. The broader concern in Washington's strategic circles is not that war in the Middle East directly causes war in the Taiwan Strait. It's that simultaneous crises stretch deterrence credibility. That is why Taiwan's leader no longer calls the Chinese mainland China but the mainland. He knows how to play modestly when the U.S. pays little attention to the island, because deterrence depends partly on perceived capacity and attention. Taiwan is not as important as Israel to the U.S., and the Middle East means more to Washington than the Taiwan Strait does. If adversaries believe the U.S. is overstretched, they may test boundaries more aggressively. China, particularly, does not have to fight a war, and the world believes it can solve the Taiwan issue without considering much of America's concerns. At the same time, the U.S. faces a structural dilemma. It seeks to contain Iran's nuclear ambitions, support Israel's security, deter China in the Asia-Pacific, weaken Russia and Europe in Ukraine, and reshape global trade in favor of the United States. These goals require resources, alliances, and political capital. A major Middle East war complicates force allocation and defense planning. It may also affect U.S. domestic politics, especially if casualties mount or energy prices surge. Historically, prolonged Middle Eastern engagements have reshaped American strategic focus. Policymakers are acutely aware of this. The question is whether this conflict remains limited or expands into something more consuming. What could happen next? While predicting wars is dangerous, we can outline several plausible paths. Scenario 1: Limited exchange, managed escalation. Iran retaliates symbolically but avoids actions that trigger an overwhelming response. Israel and the US declare that objectives have been met. Scenario 2: Prolonged regional conflict. Missile exchanges continue. Proxy actors engage. Shipping routes are disrupted. Oil prices spike. It would strain global markets and increase risks elsewhere. Scenario 3: Strategic spillover. If conflict drags on, other powers adjust strategies. China increases activity near Taiwan. Russia recalculates in Europe. Global alignment patterns shift. As a result, more US allies will become neutral, refusing to take sides between Beijing and Washington. Without allies behind it, Washington is broken. That would mark a broader systemic stress moment. At last, we have to say the confrontation is not an isolated military event. It is the culmination of years of failed diplomacy, strategic mistrust, and escalating deterrence calculations. It is also a stress test for the global power structure. Can the US manage multiple theaters? Can China leverage instability without triggering confrontation? Can regional actors avoid miscalculation? Can nuclear diplomacy be revived after bombs fall? The next few weeks will matter enormously. If escalation is controlled, the world may step back from the brink once again. If it spirals, that could become one of the defining geopolitical crises of the decade, reshaping not just the Middle East, but the Asia-Pacific balance and the future of global deterrence. And that is why the strikes on Iran are not just about Iran. They are about the architecture of power in a world that is already stretched thin.